And then you weren't up there but a few seconds, and you were already starting to crack. And then I started to crack. Welcome back to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm Thomas. There's Daniel, back for another episode.
Good morning.
You sound kind of bassy this morning.
Yeah. Got a little head cold going on, so moved down a few notes.
No problem. Well, it's good to have you, our listeners, on board again. We would like to, at the outset, thank our patrons over at patreon.com/reasontogether. We do appreciate your continued support and your generous nature, and we do thank you for that. That kind of helps things keep going here. If you're listening and you say, what is all this Patreon thing about? You can become also a patron of this podcast by going to patreon.com/reasontogether. That's patreon.com/reasontogether, and sign up for one of the various support levels there. And if you'd like to, we'd be grateful. Appreciate that.
Yes, and thanks for bearing with us.
You're making me want to clear my throat.
Yeah, you don't even need to, do you? I think we'll have an interesting episode coming up here, but I just want to remind our listeners that we like to hear your questions. We like to hear your feedback. What do you think about what we're talking about? Do you have an angle that we're not seeing? Do you agree or disagree with us? You can share with us at reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. That's reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you had, and I hope it's okay for me to bring this up. I didn't ask you in advance, but you are now the father of a high school graduate.
I am. Yes. And it's interesting. I think that in time it'll feel different. Maybe like there's like a state of, I wouldn't say shock, but you're just kind of doing a step at a time, okay, gotta do this, gotta plan for the ceremony, gotta, do this. And so we're past the ceremony, we're past the open house, but what really, of course, the ceremony was kind of moving, and I cry like I usually do. Mm-hmm. And, I just wasn't allowed to blubber. My wife said I could cry, but I couldn't blubber. Yeah. So I hope that none of it crossed the line into blubbering.
No, it didn't. But
no, good. Thank you.
But I'll have you know that, of course, I watched the live stream of it. My family did, because our sons are friends together. So we wanted to see your son graduate, and we of course knew it. We said, "Oh, Pastor Fox, he's going to break down. He's totally going to break down." And then you weren't up there but a few seconds, and you were already starting to crack. And then I started to crack. I started losing it.
Thank you.
Because just the thought of being in that position, because my son is just a couple years away from, my older son, a couple years away from graduating high school. So I'm kind of, in a sense, kind of seeing myself in you. I'm kind of living in the moment vicariously, trying to imagine what it would be like for me. And so then I'm losing it. So it's...
Well, it kind of became a joke with my wife and I that, a few years back we'd have a getaway, like an overnight getaway or something. We'd be driving in the car, and maybe in the first hour, of course it's just that time to talk about whatever. And I would talk about Levi, and I'd start crying about, how time's going so fast, and I have so much I want to teach him or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think I've kind of passed that stage. But here's your firstborn son. You feel like there's this, you want to invest in him. And then, but along the way too, I think there's been about 2 times when I've just felt moved, and I wanted to write him a letter. And to be honest, I never gave him the letter, but I think twice I wrote out some thoughts. And so that graduation speech, and if for those who don't, we're having a homeschool graduation here. So yes, the graduate gets to speak, but the parent also gets to speak, which is unusual for graduation ceremonies, because usually parents have really no involvement in that way. But this is a neat opportunity. And so my speech was more to him than to anybody else. And it's that unique opportunity to say something. You feel like this is a special moment to say something. Not that I would want to say in that moment everything that I would want to say to him. Right. But and so I guess if people know me, there probably was no bets like, hey, $5, Pastor Fox will cry, because it was a given that, that he would. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, that was a neat ceremony. But honestly, what I was going to say was, I think what kind of started hitting me more was last night. We're sitting there in the living room and he's opening his cards. People brought cards at the open house or at the graduation, and they put them in a basket. And he starts to read those cards, and I don't know, something different hit me then. You're like, wow, this, like, he's done. Something was different, and I see it's going to continue being different in the next year and two as these big steps are being taken, and you just have to do the best that you can by God's grace, just trying to follow his direction and say, how can I influence? How can I input? What do I need to keep doing day to day? You can't just sit there and moan over what you didn't get done. You got to keep pushing forward.
Can I ask you kind of a semi-personal question, and you
Sure.
don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but with being a man who is a pastor, do you ever sense any kind of social pressure or expectation that your children all go into ministry?
If so, I would say minimally. I never put that pressure on the kids personally.
Mm-hmm.
They know. I mean, of course, we have people in our home, and we have we've gone on several missions trips, and so they know that we love missions and missionaries and things like that. But as far as trying to heavy-handedly say, you ought to be a so as far as that pressure from us, so much that's really pretty much not been there. But
right.
From other people, maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But
I guess because I've often wondered, in a ministry family, when the father and mother are heavily involved in vocational ministry in some sense,
mm-hmm.
and then maybe some of the kids, or even most of the kids, even go into vocational ministry, and then maybe one or two, or however many kids there are, a few don't. Right? Do you wonder
mm-hmm.
if there's
mm-hmm.
ever a feeling in them where they might struggle with feeling like they were the odd one out, unfairly so? But you think they might struggle with that, thinking, oh, the whole rest of the family's in vocational ministry, and I'm just X. I've often wondered that, and I realize that that's not really I can see why someone would think that and feel that way, but I don't think they should.
Right.
But I can see why they would, and why there would be almost this, maybe in some sense is self-induced, or some sense societally induced pressure to feel like, well, you're kind of the runt in a sense. Yeah,
which is interesting, because I don't see why they should feel that pressure, because
right.
It's everybody has their calling, and I say that specifically to say not just calling. Ministry is a calling. Everybody has their calling,
right?
And to think that all of a pastor's children have to be called to ministry doesn't exactly make sense.
Right.
Now, not to say that the dad wouldn't be tickled, that happens, but so guy's just got to be secure in himself to say, no, this is what I'm kind of built to do, and this is where I feel God's led me.
Yeah.
I don't know how other people necessarily feel about that. I know of one circumstance, and I don't think the person necessarily feels that pressure. But again, I think that person's more secure in who they are and what they're supposed to be doing. So anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree. Sorry about the digression there.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking.
We've got a couple other questions here from listeners, and I don't know what order we want to go in. Do you have any thoughts about what you want to start with? Did you
want to do both of those? Let's deal with this scary.
Okay, yeah, that one's a good one.
Interesting one, yeah.
This is from one of our patrons, who I will leave anonymous. Says, hello, there have been certain people in my life who seem very scary to me, and I don't know why. It's not that I'm afraid of what they will do, I'm just uncomfortable around them. It usually happens with someone I just can't read or figure out. I like to think of myself as a confident person, so the fact that I am afraid of someone really bothers me. It is possibly the thing I dislike the most about myself. Do you have any practical or spiritual tips for getting over this? I don't know, maybe if I had a deeper trust in God, I wouldn't be scared of anything. Or maybe everyone struggles with this to some degree because we are human. Thanks. It's a deep question.
That is interesting, because to what he seems to be saying is not that he's literally scared in the sense that I feel imminent danger,
right.
Like this guy's going to jump out, and start strangling me or something.
Maybe like intimidation would be what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting, because intimidation really is a form of fear, isn't it?
It is.
I guess I hadn't quite put it in that word, but that helps, because I was thinking something similar where when when he put his finger on it and said, maybe it's because he said it usually happens with someone I just can't read or figure out. And I can see that there are some people that, I want to say to their discredit, they really aren't, they aren't easy to interact with socially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They don't, they're not conversational. Mm-hmm. They're not emotive. They don't express on their face or in their voice that they enjoy the interaction or the conversation. Yeah. They don't lend a whole lot to conversation. And so you have a difficult time figuring out, where do we go? What can we talk about? What do you enjoy? Who are you? And what I would say is that person's not very transparent, or at least in a way that we understand. And it's not to say that they are mean or gruff. They just, it could be part of a personality thing and an immaturity thing. But you can kind of see where that is kind of uncomfortable.
Right, sure. Well, like I know for me and my when I was first getting to know my wife, this is before we were married, we were writing each other letters. We had kind of a long distance relationship, and occasionally I would go visit, and her father kind of scared me at the beginning, very early on. Because I'm very much a conversational guy, and he's a very quiet man. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I was intimidated. I was kind of scared. I thought he didn't like me, and I thought, well, what's this going to do for my future if this man doesn't like me? But I mean, turns out, now that I've known him, for a long, long time, he's a very sweet, very gentle man, and very loving mm-hmm. man, very kind mm-hmm. man. But because he's not overly conversational at first, you really don't know what to think. And I think what did it for me was the desire to be accepted by him, and not knowing if I was at the outset.
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I created this irrational fear in myself, not realizing the rational part was he's kind of already accepted me. Otherwise, he wouldn't be letting me court his daughter.
You wouldn't be sitting here. Yeah.
Yes. And see, I knew that rationally. Okay, if he didn't accept me, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that not just is it the desire to be accepted, but it's also in our minds the development of a criteria that would tell us that we're accepted.
Yeah.
Well, and so in other words, he has to react in a certain way for me to feel, I'm accepted. He likes me. And they're not doing that because they don't operate that way. And so my first thought or two would be, number one, let somebody, to some degree, let somebody be who they are. Don't try to stuff them into a mold to express like you want them to express. Mm-hmm. Just to some degree, take them as they are and say, well, that's who they are. It doesn't mean that they don't like me.
Yeah.
It's just, that's how they operate. But number two, I would draw them out with questions, to say, hey, so what interests you? What are your hobbies?
Yeah.
How are things going? See what they talk about. If they don't talk about much of anything and you say, well, so what interests you? They might tell you a couple things. Well, then start to think or do some study and say, what can I learn about those things? Because everybody's passionate about something. Mm-hmm. They just may not express it in the same way, or it may not be something that you're at all familiar with. But if you figure out what they're passionate about, then you can connect with them on some way, and I think they'll begin to open up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think in maybe an unhealthy scenario, this kind of discomfort with people could potentially come from a little bit of human pride. Not in every scenario. I think mm-hmm. some level of intimidation is kind of normal, in some personalities, but in others, it can be a form of pride because the desire for acceptance can really sometimes cloud out good judgment sometimes. And as human beings, we have a tendency to fill in the gaps in people's thinking. So you're talking to someone, they didn't say this, but maybe what they're thinking was this. And we start to try and impose thoughts on them that they didn't express because they were silent, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that it can be unhealthy in a sense to have this fear of others because we kind of distort our thinking with it, and we start to then change our own behaviors to try and compensate, if that makes sense. And we're not being ourselves either. So because we're seeking acceptance with others, and there's kind of this weird balance you have to strike with. Yes, testimony is important, and it's important to have the respect of others in many scenarios. But there's also another side of that where we just don't need to care sometimes and we just need to, be yourself and have some confidence and some assertiveness and be not afraid.
Thinking a similar thing myself is be comfortable in your own skin,
right?
With who you are now. But on the other hand, it may also be challenging you to better a skill or to mature more. Where I'm thinking, and I'm trying to I'm putting this in my own perspective, somebody who I'm uncomfortable with. I remember in my college days, I can think of one person in particular that I thought anything that would come out of my mouth would sound stupid or would sound immature, because this person, I felt like he was so advanced in ministry and in years and in wisdom that, what this little 20-year-old had to say or whatever would have just been like dumb. And so that was intimidating. And then there was a couple other people, and I would say I'm not one to think fast on my feet, to back and forth. And so some people just like, man, they just come up with these questions and they'll ask you these questions. And that was the thing that really, and so for a personality like mine, well, you think about the question and you want to kind of mull it over and make sure you express it right and not, and express correctly what you mean to be saying and blah, blah, blah. Well, that, I don't know if those guys were, you don't want to sit there for 3 minutes in front of somebody if you're not comfortable with them and trying to mull out an answer and hash over it in your mind and re-say it 3 times. And so that kind of person would set me on edge a little because they would ask this question. I'd be like, I don't feel like I can have an adequate answer for that. Because there's some questions.
Well, you don't want to look stupid.
Well, right. And I mean, like, I feel stupid because I remember being in a van load of guys one time going golfing, and one guy asked some kind of general ministry question. You guys have this feeling that blah, 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 blah. And I don't really even look at things like that. I mean, I don't know, or whatever it was. And I think I even got teased for it some because the other guys, yeah. And I was like, no, I'm not really. But I'm like, oh, sure. Yeah.
To be honest, sometimes it's the guy that doesn't care if he looks stupid who ends up smarter than everybody else, because he's willing to ask the dumb questions. He's willing to ask the things that maybe seem obvious to everyone else, and he doesn't care that it doesn't seem obvious to him. And he asks and he learns something, whereas everybody else is taking things for granted. So sometimes there's a benefit to just kind of overcoming that intimidation, saying, this is the question I have. This is the thought I have. I'm just going to say it. And if someone corrects me on it, then I'll learn from that. And
good.
And then I'm better prepared.
And with that, it's even just a transparency. Mm-hmm. Maybe not a question, but just to say, I've never honestly actually even analyzed things that way. I don't even know what to say to you. You know what I mean? And then just put it out there.
And to think of it really, in probably most scenarios, we're overblowing the thing that could potentially happen if we say the wrong thing, right? Obviously, words matter. And sometimes you could say something that could really ruin your testimony or destroy your life or somebody else's. But in most of the times, you get this irrational fear of what the person might think of you. When we forget to ask, okay, if they do think that of me, what does that do? What's the worst that could happen if they think that of me, right? And usually it's not that much, but at least you asked your question. At least you were true to what the Lord wants you to do, and you were yourself. You didn't try to put on airs. At least you were genuine. But to if we could bring Scripture to bear on this subject, as is our hopeful custom, what do you think it means in Proverbs 29:25, where it says that the fear of man bringeth a snare?
Well, right at first blush, it to me, that idea that to give me the opposite of that, because Proverbs is so often it's built in parallels, and if you look at the parallel passage, it helps you to understand the other part of the passage. So what was that? Proverbs 29:25?
Yeah, 29:25. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be saved. There's
right. So there's an obvious contrast there. That to put weight. It's kind of like, the way I see it is to pattern yourself after man's thinking, which is essentially what you're doing when you're fearing a man. Mm-hmm. You're trying to you're living by a pattern that's man-made. Just like you're saying, I assume into them what they're thinking, or I'm taking their whole mold as my way of thinking instead of being me. So by fearing a man, we typically think of that afraidness, and there is that afraidness, but it's because I'm governing my thoughts and actions according to their criteria. So that brings a snare. When I think about a snare, that is a trap of some sort.
Yeah, a trap, something that ultimately ends in demise. It was a hunter's tool, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that the fear of man can cause you to be silent when you should speak, or speak when you should be silent.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's what the fear of man can often do. But, trying to apply then, how do you trust the Lord in a conversation with somebody else? How do you apply that?
The idea of to trust the Lord, I think about a path, and I think about the idea of trust is built on the concept of something being firm.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we say something is true, we mean it is real, but it is, let me put it this way, when in a sermon you say, amen, amen. Well, what does that mean? What we're basically saying is what he said is reliable, it's firm, you can count on it, you can rest on that. And so when it says trusting in the Lord, it's seeing the Lord for being as firm as he is. In other words, he said it, and I can walk that way, even if it doesn't seem right. I'm going to walk that path, and I'm not going to slip and slide, and I'm not going to sink into the mud and the muck, because it is firm. What he says is firm. So in other words, as I'm talking to somebody, as I'm interacting with somebody, I need to be walking or living according to the way that God has designed me to interact with that person. If that means being honest, if it means, a rebuke, if it means a kindness, if it means being silent because I don't know the whole story, whatever God's design for that interaction is, I need to be doing that.
Or even being firm in a decision.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fear of man can be a snare when you have decided something and you're talking with someone else, and now you doubt your decision because of them, because of who they are. Them. Not because of any leading of the Lord, but because, this fear of peer pressure or a desire for affirmation from the other person, you might actually change your decision for wrong reasons. So the fear of man can be a snare in that way as well. And in that sense, you have to trust the Lord's leading in your life, that you've made a right decision. And
sometimes, now I know seems like an extreme example, but in the Old Testament, you think about different military battles that were fought. Mm-hmm. And okay, so here's like, and I don't remember the passage exactly, but probably this pea-sized army, walking out of Jerusalem, whatever, and they're singing, right? Mm-hmm. And they're facing this foe, or maybe it's Gideon and his 300 men, and there's literally thousands of people down in the valley. And what you see is so obviously different than what you're told.
Right.
You're told, do this, and and God's going to take care of you. And you're like, but that could never work. I mean, look what I see. And so in life, when you see something, you're so intimidated by a person, you have to say, but the Bible says this.
Right. Well, even like with Joshua and Caleb, when they decided, listen, the Lord's given us this land, let's go. It's doable. Right. Let's do it. And they were outnumbered, right? The other spies were like, no, the place is terrifying and forget it. To actually stand firm when the majority disagree with you because you know what the Lord wants. Mm-hmm. Those guys had no fear of man in that scenario.
Yeah, that's good.
And had they, what kind of decision would they have made? What kind of future outlook would they have had? The blessings they received for having been the obedient spies would have been lost.
Yes.
What else was I going to ask you about this? I wrote down a note on this. Where is it? I was just, in thinking about this, I was looking up some other scriptures on the subject. And of course, our patron who asked this question mentions the word confident in there, about being confident, thinks of himself as a confident person. Mm-hmm. Is that the same thing as what we're talking about, or about trusting the Lord, or is confidence something different?
To me, I would say it is similar. The end result is similar. We can have a confidence in the Lord because of who he is and what he has told us, and how firm we feel in understanding what he's told us. But the question is it a Lord confidence or a self-confidence? Mm-hmm. And yes, in a sense, we can have self-confidence because of our experience, and we say, I've been through this before.
Right.
I know my ability here, and that's not proud to recognize your own ability.
That was going to be my next question for you. So you kind of answered it right out of the gate. Is there any kind of self-confidence that isn't bad? And I think you're right. There is a self-confidence that comes from experience with, the older you get and the more things you do, then every new thing you come across, you're like, well, I've done something harder than that before. This shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah. And I think, and I was talking to my kids about this just recently, in humility, and maybe I didn't use the word confidence, but it's one thing to recognize what you can do. And I guess it's maybe how you interpret that, where the pride can come in. For instance, we enjoy ping pong, so as we play, one of my sons is getting pretty good at it, and so he can feel, I'm good at ping pong. Mm-hmm. Well, the truth is, he is pretty good at ping pong, but that's relative to our pond right here. He's kind of a big fish in a small pond. If you just walk around saying, I am awesome at ping pong, well, then some guy's going to come up and just like totally toast you and whatever, and you, oh, whoa, and so but how you interpret that, even so let's say you're the grand champion, you're the world champion of ping pong. Yeah. Okay, so I'm awesome at ping pong. What does that mean? What does that mean about me as a person? I'm better than you, or that I could stand with my chest puffed out? It just means I'm good at ping pong. Right. I mean, well, it sort of you know what I'm saying by that? Yeah. So when people say, wow, that was man, that was a really nice piano piece that you did, and you could think in yourself, yeah, pretty awesome. But no, that's not how to interpret that. The way to interpret that is, well, I'm glad that was a blessing. It's a good response. Right. But just say, God gave me that ability, and I use it for Him, and I'm glad that you recognized it, and I'm glad it was a blessing. It's not to say, oh, no, I don't have any ability. No, I'm nothing. Yeah. Well, but how do I interpret that? I interpret it to say, well, that's I'm using it for the Lord. Yeah.
Well, I know for me, I've had the privilege of training a number of radiologic technologists over the years, and you can always tell a difference between one who's confident and one who's not. And honestly, I'm rarely looking for just the technical expertise when training someone who's new on the job. You can tell when someone is confident, and that kind of indicates in some ways they've had some experience. Yeah. And others, they're terrified like a deer in the headlights. And that kind of confidence that comes from experience, I think, is an acceptable form of confidence.
Yeah, sure.
The other thing, there's other scriptures here I wanted to bring into the conversation, because I think in addition to not necessarily being paralyzed by the need for the affirmation of others, I think the other thing that can help you not feel intimidated is a clear conscience. And I was thinking of Proverbs 28:1. There's another verse that came up in my study on this, was, the wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion.
Wow. Good, Tom.
So in addition to not necessarily living for the affirmation of others, if you have a clear conscience, you don't have to be afraid of other people. You really don't. And some other scriptures just to kind of throw out there for time's sake of just kind of rapid fire them at you. I was thinking of Jeremiah, the prophet, right? When the Lord first called him to preach for him. Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. He says, then said I, Ah, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a child. I'd have to do some study on that, but I mean, what he meant by I am a child. Right. But I mean, clearly that's not rational. I mean, I can see maybe he's trying to see his own inadequacy, and I think that's fair game. It's important to see that we're not adequate enough to do the Lord's work. We need the Lord. But to say I am a child, maybe overstating it a bit. But the Lord said unto him, verse 7, say not I am a child, for thou shalt go to all that I send thee, and whatsoever I command thee thou shalt speak. And then verse 8 is really what kind of did it for me. He says, be not afraid of their faces, for I am with thee to deliver thee, saith the Lord. So there's even some sense here where Jeremiah is saying, I'm afraid of the countenance of others. There's the personalities, the expressions of others that I'm kind of terrified of. I mean, the Lord's telling him to not be afraid of their faces, which means what? It means he was.
And I mean, think about that. And isn't that just a common thing? Now, maybe not to extroverts, but for those who've gone on door-to-door visitation, or you talk to someone, to see an angry countenance of someone who is disliking you facially, and then even going beyond that and saying something hurtful, about what you're doing, that's hard to handle. The people's countenances, their faces, that you want to make people happy. You want them to be agreeable and congenial. And when they're not, so I mean, we can totally relate to Jeremiah in this generation too. Yeah. In that way, be not afraid of their faces. Yeah. So you're saying that he was giving him the command because he likely was afraid of them.
He likely was. And the similar thing for Ezekiel chapter 2 and verse 6. And thou, son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words. Right? And then he says, though briars and thorns be with thee, and thou doest well among scorpions, be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. So he's clearly going to have to deal with prophets and priests and princes who are all pretty much terrible by this point, and he's got to tell them the truth. Right?
And again,
that's a hard thing.
Going back to your and that's going back to your first point is just not so much that you're talking about the guilty conscience, but first of all, just the lack of pride. Just saying, this is what I got to do. This is what I'm supposed to do. And so I'm preaching to you, and it doesn't matter to me what you think about it.
Yeah.
You know. And I wanted to insert a thought, or did you have another verse there you wanted to share?
I do have another one, but you can go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I told my boys, and tried to communicate a little bit to them here over the years, and hopefully a lot by example, is that when you don't know something, don't be afraid to ask. You go into a store, you're going to be thrown into all these situations, and if you're not just like a really, kind of, or if you're not an extroverted, kind of just congenial, sociable kind of guy, you're just going to have to tell yourself, I don't know how to do this, and I'm going to have to ask questions. So you're going to walk into an office building and go, this is my first time doing this. I don't know where to go. Who do I talk to about this? Or you're going to go to, Ace Hardware and say, I'm trying to fix this, and I don't know what I need. Or you're going to go to that guy at church and say, man, my car's making this noise, and I have no clue, whatever. And can you help me? And along the way, you're going to find kind people who go, oh, sure, yeah, here, let me show you. Oh, here's the tool you need. Oh, this is how you do it. Or here's what you're hearing. Or, oh, yeah, you need to talk to so-and-so. And then, by the time you reach 40, 50 years old, whatever, you're learning how a lot of different facets of life work. And now you can help your kids along, but you just got to ask questions. If you always go, I don't know what to do, and you just cower back, things are going to start crumbling in around you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're exactly right about that. And, like even from personal experience, for some reason, people tend to think that that I have a talent for building things or making things. And, I suppose I can do that a little bit, but, it's primarily because I've had a lot of things break. I'm serious.
Yeah.
I'm kind of rough on things, and I tend to be a little heavy-handed on things. I tend to break things. I'm getting better at it. But over the years, most of the things I've learned about building and making things and fixing things was from doing what you said, is to walk into a place and say, I'm kind of new to this. What do I need? Tell me what I need to know. And that has served me well with learning stuff. And it's just being willing to ask a question. And I think sometimes, you feel this intimidation walking into a place thinking, okay, here they only sell specialized tools for a particular thing. And I'm walking into this place like a total newbie.
Right. And I'm going to look so stupid.
I'm going to look so stupid. So I need to act like I know what I'm looking for. No, you don't.
Right.
No, you don't. Someone wants me to make them forged drawer pulls for their kitchen cabinets. And I don't have a forge. I'm not a blacksmith. But they said, well, I'll buy you a forge. I'm like, okay. I told them, I said, I've never done that, but they're like, I'll buy you a forge. I'm like, all right.
You're a blacksmith now.
I guess I am, at least starting to be. So I walked into a place the other day that was a farrier supply. A farrier is a horseshoer. And I just walked in. I said, I'm here to buy an anvil. I kind of figured out generally what I need for anvils, I think. But is there anything else that I might need that you think would be helpful? Because I have no idea what I'm doing with this. And he put me on to a site that has really great prices on blacksmith tools and has interesting articles and stuff. And it's like, how would I have found that if I didn't just ask? I think, anyway, I know I'm getting onto a rabbit trail here, but, I think there's value in not necessarily being afraid to look dumb and just asking.
You're right. Absolutely.
You learn things that way.
Yep. But if it's that fear of looking dumb, and what are they going to think of me? All these guys are experienced in their trade, and here I come in like whatever, and I'm asking this, basic level question. Don't be afraid of that.
Yeah.
Just be who you are and learn.
Yeah. So I guess if we could maybe put a finer point on the solution here that our listener is asking for. He asked if we had any tips on solving that. Honestly, I think time is going to be the most valuable thing that you have, and I know that's maybe not a fun answer, because I think more confidence and less fear will happen over time if you're doing the right things now. And that is, as Proverbs 29:25 said, is putting your trust in the Lord and learning to not live for the affirmation of others and making sure that, you've done some introspection, that there's no human pride involved in why you're seeking the affirmation of others, and just give it time. And as you grow and get older and get more experience and ask more questions, and I think it'll come.
Good. All right. Well, that took longer than I expected.
Oh, wow.
But,
yeah, it did.
yeah, but that was a neat conversation. I enjoyed that. So we really don't have time for the other one, the other question that we had, I don't think.
Yeah, probably not. Is there a quick one we could throw in before the end here?
Well, you know what? I was going to, I had been sharing some poems over time, just some neat poems that I had liked. And there's one that I think fits this conversation to some degree, because we're talking about fear.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a poem written, and let's see here, by E.H. Hamilton. There's a story behind it of missions and things like that, but it's called Afraid of What? Have you ever heard this poem?
It does ring a bell.
Okay. I first heard it by missionary Daryl Champlin. And,
okay. That may be where I've heard that, actually.
Yeah. And here's how it goes. Afraid of what? To feel the Spirit's glad release, to pass from pain to perfect peace, the strife and strain of life to cease. Afraid of that? Afraid of what? Afraid to see the Savior's face, to hear his welcome, and to trace the glory gleam from wounds of grace. Afraid of that? Afraid of what? A flash, a crash, a pierced heart, brief darkness, light, O heaven's art, a wound of his a counterpart. Afraid of that? Afraid of what? To enter into heaven's rest, and yet to serve the Master blessed, from service good to service best. Afraid of that? Afraid of what? To do by death what life could not, baptize with blood a stony plot, till souls shall blossom from that spot. Afraid of that? I think that's a neat poem talking about, are we really afraid to give it all in the service, particularly to give our life even as a martyr, and what that really means.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, Brother Champlin, he's now passed, but and him say that, and he answered the question, afraid of that, and he's saying for so many people, it's yes, we are afraid of that.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
well, good.
Not exactly the fear we were talking about in our episode necessarily,
no.
but there's another poem you might want to look up, Afraid of What? By E.H. Hamilton.
Good. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode.
Yeah, Will, thank you so much for listening again.
Yeah, we do appreciate the question. Hopefully that has been a help. If we didn't quite get it right, like as far as maybe that wasn't the question you were asking necessarily, write us again and say, well, I was kind of thinking this or that. Let us know if there's any further way that we can follow up to that subject, and we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, we are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.